and welcome to NurtureStore's colour study videos. My name's Kathy and today our focus is on primary colours. Join in and create your own piece of art alongside me as we learn about the colour wheel, the famous artist Piet Mondrian, and how art and math can go together. We'll also be learning more about how scientists and artists think about colours and enjoy creating our own art project. This art activity is a great art activity for relaxation and well-being. It's a simple project using simple materials so everyone can join in. Come along, spend some time with me as we learn something new, spend some time being mindful and creative. In a minute, we're going to find out what colour actually is, but so you can join in and make your own artwork at the same time as me, let's just get our materials ready first. For this project, I'm going to use a page in my sketchbook, but any sheet of white paper or card will be fine to use. I've also got black card and card in red, yellow and blue. Plus I've got some scissors, a ruler, a pencil and a glue stick. Any craft glue will be fine, but I like to use a glue stick because it's less messy. You might prefer to use marker pens or paint rather than the coloured paper and card, and it's up to you. Remember, you're the artist in charge of your project, so you get to choose. So if you prefer to draw your black lines for this project with a ruler and a black marker pen, please go ahead, and you might prefer to use marker pens or paint to add the colour blocks we're going to be using. So whether you're using coloured paper like me or pens and paint, you'll need to have them in black, yellow, red and blue. So gather your materials and we can make a start. In a minute, we're going to talk about colour and look at the colour wheel, but let's get started on our project by prepping our page. I'm going to use my ruler and pencil to draw a grid of lines all over my page. You don't have to do this, but I think it's going to make it easier for me to place the lines and the shapes of the picture later on. Plus, if you want to add in some math elements to this project, having this grid in place will make that work better. You could use a printed sheet of grid or graph paper if you've got that, but you can also draw your own grid like me. I'm making my lines 1 centimetre apart, so I'm just marking out the dots along 1 centimetre intervals first, both along one side of the page and then alongside the adjoining side. And then I'm going to use the ruler to draw lines to make my grid using the dots to guide me like this. So while we go ahead and get this grid drawn, let's talk about colour. Do you know what colour is? Have you ever even thought about that before? Of course, we see colours all the time, everywhere we look, but what gives something its colour? Do you know? We can turn to science for the answer. And as with any subject, you can explore it as much as you like and get into lots of detail and depth. But put very simply, colour is light. If you think about light, for example, the light coming from the sun, you might know that light is not just one single beam of light, but is actually made up of different waves of light. These waves of light coming from the sun reach our Earth and bounce off different surfaces, and they're reflected back to our eyes. So the waves of light coming from the sun might bounce off a tree or a car or your cat. These waves of light are bounced and reflected back to our eyes, and we see these waves of light as colour. So we see a green tree, a blue car and a ginger cat. The waves in light are different. So some of the waves in light are long waves and some are short waves. If short waves of light is the one that gets reflected back to our eyes, we see that as purple or blue colour. And if long waves of light are reflected into our eyes, we see red. Don't you think that's amazing? You can find out more about the science of light and colour if you're interested, but let's just pop back to our artwork for now. You'll see I'm cutting out strips of black card, which we're going to be using in our pictures. In a moment, I'll show you some famous paintings by the artist Piet Mondrian, and you'll see why we need these black lines for our project then. But for now, if you're using card or paper like me, let's get ready for our art by cutting out long, thin lines from our black card. I'm going to cut some thin lines and some very thin lines, so I'll have the option to use both of them in my picture, and you might like to do the same. I'm not measuring them exactly in terms of making them a certain number of centimeters, but I am going to use my ruler to help me get straight lines, because I tend to get things a bit wonky if I don't use a ruler and if I just try and cut by eye. We're not trying to get perfection here, but do try to get your lines as straight as you can so that we can make art in the style of Piet Mondrian. And you'll see in a minute how great he was at making straight lines. Okay, but first, this video is part of NurtureStore's colour theory lessons, so let's talk about colour. I don't know if you've already seen our lesson on warm and cool colours, where we made a gorgeous disco ball. If you haven't, I'll link to it in the description and at the end of the video so you can check it out. And I wanted to let you know that I'm putting together a complete set of colour theory lesson plans and principles for you in a pack that you can download and print off. So that's going to make it really easy for you to enjoy these lessons or even to teach them, because you'll have a whole set of lessons about colour theory along with fun art projects that you can try and examples of famous art to illustrate all the lessons. So if you'd like to have that colour theory lesson pack, subscribe to the channel and check out the video description for all the details. Now let's get back to talking about colour. Here's a picture of the colour wheel. It represents all the colours of light as spokes on a wheel. So we're starting with red. You can see all the colours all the way around the wheel, from orange, yellow, green, blue and purple, then back to red. In this series of colour videos, we'll be talking about the colours on this wheel and grouping them together in different ways and using them for each of our art projects in the series. We've already done a lesson together grouping the colours as warm and cool colours when we made our disco ball. And now in this video, we're going to be talking about the combination of colours called primary colours. So the word primary means the most important, or the first, or the beginning. And as an artist, when we talk about primary colours, we're talking about three colours, and they're red, yellow and blue. And you'll see that they sit at equal distance apart from each other on the colour wheel. You might think of them as the original colours because they can't be made by mixing any of the other colours together. All the other colours can be made by mixing combinations of red, yellow and or blue. For example, to make green, you can mix yellow and blue together. But you can't make yellow or blue by mixing any of the other colours. So that's why these primary colours of red, yellow and blue are primary colours. They're the origin or original colours. One artist who loved to use these primary colours in his art is the artist we're featuring today, and his name's Piet Mondrian. Let's look at some of his art and then we'll use his designs as the inspiration for our own pictures. Here he is. He was a Dutch artist and he was born in Amersfoort, Netherlands in 1872, and then he died in New York City in 1944. He was a member of the De Stijl art group, and De Stijl means the style. Let's look at some of his paintings while we talk about him. And as we look at them, just think about what you can see. Think about what colours he uses and maybe what his paintings remind you of or make you think of. Here's the first. Piet Mondrian is famous for his abstract art paintings. If you don't know that word for describing art, abstract art is art that doesn't try and show realistic or recognizable pictures. So he's not trying to show you a picture of a flower or a cat. Abstract art is made up of shapes and colors and textures. And you'll see Mondrian's art use straight, horizontal and vertical lines on a white background, together with rectangles or squares of our primary colours. That's red, yellow and blue. One thing I find absolutely amazing is that Piet Mondrian never used a ruler to measure out his lines, unlike me, who can't cut out a piece of paper without a ruler, without it being all wonky. He is very careful about the composition of his paintings. Composition means the arrangement of the shapes and the images that the artist chooses. And Mondrian thought really carefully about where to place the lines and the colour blocks in his paintings. And you'll notice he often placed the colour blocks around the edges of his pictures and not in the centres. Mondrian focused on using primary colours, red, yellow and blue, in his art, but of course other artists use them too. They might use them as an artistic challenge in their paintings, or where they want to make a strong contrast to make their colours look vibrant. Let's have a look at two more famous paintings. The first one is painted by Vincent van Gogh. Can you see how he's used primary colours here? Where's the red and the yellow, and where's the blue? And this one painted by Vermeer. Can you see where he's used primary colours? Spot the red and the yellow and the blue. Okay, so now we've looked at Mondrian's art. Let's create our own pictures inspired by him. Let's use the three main motifs of his style ourselves. So we're going to create our piece on a white background, like Mondrian. We're going to use straight black lines that we place horizontally and vertically on our page. And let's add geometric blocks of primary colours. We'll use rectangles and squares in red, yellow and blue. If you're making along with me and using paper or card, let's get our colour blocks ready. You can see I've got 3 squares of paper in red, yellow and blue, and I want to give you some ideas of how you can include math in your art lessons if you'd like to. You don't have to do this, but I want to give you the option. So I'm starting with 3 squares and I'm measuring them to make sure that they're the same size. I'm going to make mine so that each side is 6 centimetres. That's a good size for my page, and if you want to, you can do the same. I should say that it's up to you how you cut them out. If you're doing this project with very young children, or perhaps you're doing it with people who haven't got as much mobility in their hands, you might like to prepare all the lines and shapes for them in advance, so that then they can still enjoy creating art without the hassle of cutting it all out. Or you might have young children who are just learning to use scissors, so let them do the cutting out themselves, because you're going to help them build those scissor skills and fine motor skills. And remember, enjoying the process and being creative is the goal here. So it's totally okay if their squares and rectangles are a bit wonky. Getting used to using scissors is hard. And if you're well used to using scissors, maybe you haven't used a craft knife with a ruler and a cutting board before. So maybe you'd like to try that method for a new challenge. I know we've got lots of people of different ages and stages in the NurtureStore community. So join in whichever way suits you. Okay, so now it's time to play with our lines and shapes and create a Mondrian inspired picture. Spend some time playing around with the elements that you've got. Try out different versions and see how they look to you. Even if you think you know what you want to create, do spend a little time experimenting and exploring with the designs first. I'm going to start by playing with the black lines. I want to try overlapping some of the lines because I noticed Mondrian did that in one of his paintings. I'm going to experiment with using both the thicker lines and the thinner lines and see which combination I like best, whether I want to use all thick lines or all thin ones, or whether I want to have a combination of the two on the page. Once you've decided on how you want to lay out your black lines, you can think about where you're going to add colour. So we've got 3 primary colours of red, blue and yellow. Do you want to use all 3 in your picture, or do you want to use 1 or 2? Do you want all your colour blocks to be the same size or not? Do you want to use squares or rectangles, or do you want to have a mix of both? Try out a few combinations like me and see what you think about the options. Which ones do you like best? Remember, you're the artist in charge, so you get to decide what you like and how you want your picture to look. We're taking the ideas of primary colours and black lines and colour blocks from Mondrian as a creative challenge to ourselves. And our finished picture is going to be Mondrian inspired, but you're also going to be putting a bit of yourself into the picture too. Have you heard the word STEM? If you haven't, it stands for science, technology, engineering and math. Some people study STEM subjects, science lessons or math lessons, or they work in STEM jobs like doctors and computer programmers. What about the word STEAM? Have you heard of that? STEAM subjects and jobs include that important element of art. So the word means science, technology, engineering, art and math. It's very important to add art into the mix with the other subjects. It makes our learning and our work more interesting, more welcoming, because people who love science and also the people who love art are included. And it makes everything more successful because you're getting the benefit of the skills and expertise of all the scientists and all the artists. Just as we've seen scientists and artists think about colour in different ways. Remember, we talked about colour being light with long and short waves. That's a science point of view. And we also talked about the colour wheel and using colours to show different feelings. That's more of an artistic perspective. New ways improving the way we live. We can learn more, become better at our jobs, and think up exciting new ideas when we think about all the subjects from the other perspective. Architects can help engineers build better bridges and buildings. Illustrators can help coders make better computer games. And Mondrian's paintings are great examples for us to look at to explore these links between art and math. So while we work on our pictures, let's think about the math in them. Let's look again at the examples of Mondrian's work, and you can think about the picture you're making too, and think about them as a mathematician. How can you use math vocabulary, math words, and ideas you've learned about in your math lessons to describe the art you're making or the art you're seeing? Noticed all the shapes Mondrian used. They were all squares and rectangles. What's the difference between a square and a rectangle? Which ones are you going to use in your picture? Notice the arrangement of lines in Mondrian's work are either parallel lines, that's lines like a train track that could go on forever and never touch. And he also used perpendicular lines. They're lines arranged like the corner of a grid, one line straight up and one going straight down. And if you've already learned about angles in your math lessons, notice the angles Mondrian uses. They're all 90 degrees. So you might like to think about the picture you're creating as a piece of mathematical art. You don't have to if that's not right for you, but I think it's interesting and I wanted to give you the option. And then once you're happy with the design that's going to be your final picture, use your glue stick to stick all the pieces of card or paper in place. It's a good idea to have a spare piece of paper alongside so you can apply the glue to your lines and shapes on it, so then you're not going to get any stray glue on the white background that you're using for your final picture. I'm going over my lines and shapes a few times with the glue stick to make sure it's nice and sticky and it will hold in place. I'm using the grid lines that I drew to help me line up everything and get them nice and straight. I hope Mondrian would approve. When we looked at Mondrian's paintings, what did they make you think of? I really think they look like city maps, with the black lines being the city streets laid out in the grid of blocks. Take a look at these maps. of New York and Chicago in the United States of America, and you'll see how they're laid out in a grid of blocks. You probably know that lots of cities around the world are laid out in the same kind of grid design. And this grid design gets designed by the city planners and the architects who are going to go ahead and build the city. You might like to think about why so many cities use this grid and block layout. And then compare the grid cities to these older maps. This one is of ancient Rome in Italy. You might like to think about how these city layouts are different. This one is of Edo, which is now called Tokyo, which is in Japan. Cities that have been planned and built more recently, rather than cities that have developed over a long period of time, tend to use this grid layout, so the blocks of buildings in the spaces between the roads are square or rectangular. Buildings get arranged so that they face the street with their entrance doors along the sidewalks or pavements, and then they might have private courtyards or even gardens at the rear. Here's a photo of the streets and the buildings in Barcelona in Spain. Planning a city with numbered blocks makes it easier to organise the space, and then you can plan in areas for schools and hospitals and parks and so on, and it makes it harder to get lost. Do you think Mondrian's paintings look like city maps? You might like to look at a map of the place where you live and see if it's arranged like a grid too. Do you live in a very old city? Maybe it's not organised like a grid, or do you live in a newer place and maybe it is? One idea you might like to take forward for another piece of art is to take a map of where you live and use it as an inspiration to make a Mondrian style map of your town. Now, while we finish our pictures, I wanted to give you some more ideas of variations you could try so that you can make a project that's suited to you and anyone else that you're creating art with. Check out the link in the video description for details of where to get the full colour theory lesson plans and printables pack that will make it really easy for you to take part in these lessons and even to teach them to others. We've already talked about how you can make this project more accessible by cutting out all the lines and the squares and the rectangles in advance. So if you're making art with young children perhaps, that makes it easier for them to get stuck in and enjoy the process of making art without having to hang around and wait for things to be cut out. Another variation which is fun to try is to use cellophane. So then you can prepare black strips and the primary coloured rectangles and squares out of cellophane and use them on a light table or on an overhead projector or even on contact paper or sticky back plastic and create art that way. And to incorporate more art in this project, if you wanted to explore the math and art STEAM lesson, you could draw a grid or work on grid paper like I've done, and then at the end you could calculate the area and the perimeter of the colour blocks that you've used. You might work with fractions too. You could start with equal size squares like I've done. Mine were 6 centimetres in length and width, and then cut one square into halves, so that makes them 3 centimetres by 6 centimetres. Cut one of the other squares into thirds, so they're going to be 2 centimetres by 6 centimetres. And then cut the last one into quarters, so they're going to be 3 centimetres by 3 centimetres. And then you could take some time to notice which shapes are still squares and where you've created rectangles, which fraction's bigger, and you could compare equivalent fractions, so looking at how 2 quarters are the same size as 1/2. You might like to set a math challenge for your art. This is great if you're homeschooling or if you're an art teacher or a math teacher and you want a school-wide or a cross-curricular project. And it's great to do if you're doing art on your own for your creativity because you're adding in a new challenge to get you thinking and creating differently. So for example, you could set a challenge to use one of each of the fractions in your art. So you have to incorporate a half and a third and a quarter. Or you could set a challenge to use multiples of 3. So you're going to use all 3 primary colours, 3 sizes of fractions, 3 thick lines and 3 thin lines, for example. Or you could use the primary coloured blocks that add up to a certain area or perimeter. So you're going to have to work out the math while you cut out your shapes. And that's why having a grid helps, because you can use that to work out the perimeter and the area. And if you're a teacher or a homeschooler, you could set the challenge for your children because you know which math skills you want them to work on, or you could have them think of their own math challenge and apply it to their art. And you don't need to do any of this. You can enjoy looking at Piet Mondrian's art and taking the time with me to make your own Mondrian inspired piece. I've really enjoyed taking some time out of my day to play with these lines and shapes. I don't usually focus on using primary colours, so that was interesting to try something new for me. How did you get on? Did you like using red, blue and yellow? What about the strict straight lines and the squares and the rectangles? Did you like having to use that, or was that quite a challenge? Come and chat with me in the comments, let me know. And now you know about primary colours, watch this video to learn about another aspect of the colour wheel and come and make a disco ball with me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.